we are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I am Jacob Winograd. I'm the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, part of our Christians for Liberty network. I'm glad to be with you tonight. Had a little bit of a change of plans. I was going to be talking to my good friend Noel of the Cajun Libertarian podcast, but and I actually, while I'm bringing him up, everyone please pray for him because he's gone through some stuff tonight. His house suffered some major water damage, and everyone's safe and okay, but they could definitely use your thoughts and prayers right now. I've known Noel a good little while here in the Liberty Movement. Good guy, fellow Christian. We'll definitely be getting him back on at some point as soon as things calm down for him. So instead, I don't like that we're having this happen as sort of a last-minute thing, because this should have been more pre-planned. But as I like to say, that the green room, as the slogan goes, is open and unscripted. So we'll stay true to form here tonight. My guest for tonight is the man himself, the founder of the Libertarian Christian Institute, Norman Horn. Norman, how are you doing tonight?
Jacob, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad we could make this happen, even if it's very unscripted and very unplanned, but this is good.
Well, that's all right. It's the free market at work.
Yeah, give the people what they want.
Exactly. Everyone who's tuning in right now, if you could do me a few favors before we get into tonight's conversation. First of all, basic podcast stuff that you got to do as a YouTuber when you're live streaming. Please give this video a thumbs up, because that way more people can see it, because then YouTube will boost it in the algorithms, and we appreciate that. If you want to share it on social media, that helps as well. Subscribe if you haven't already. I also want to remind people of stuff going on here at LCI, that we have that challenge grant that I've mentioned on several of the last live streams that I've done. And we're making very good progress on that. Last I checked, I think we're quickly approaching
about 35%.
Yeah, so
yeah,
doing good, but we want to finish strong. So you can go, and I'm going to put it up here now as soon as I find the right ticker. Donate to LCI at libertarianchristians.com/donate. It can be a one-time donation, or if you sign up for monthly at $10 or more a month. Is that right? $10 or more a month?
I think that's correct.
Insider?
Yeah.
I haven't plugged insiders in a while, but yeah, become an LCI insider. You get all sorts of special perks, behind the
extra
scenes,
goodies.
Extra goodies. You get to talk with us. You can
It's fun.
meet up and talk with Norman and me and Doug and those other guys that we don't care about as much. But I'm kidding. But I'm really excited. This actually works out, so this is a good segue where I get to talk to Norman not only about the future of LCI, because this challenge grant, everything that we're promoting with this fundraiser is to try to take everything we're doing and really blow it up and expand next year in 2025. If I'm remembering correctly, I think last year we got in front of over 1 million people, and I think our goal next year is to double it. Is that right, Norm?
Well, you're pretty close. 2023, we and these are all kind of estimates. The metrics are all a little fuzzy at times, and you never know exactly where you're landing. So we try to be conservative in our estimates. We feel pretty confident that last year in 2023 we reached over 600,000 people. This year, we believe that we've pretty well accomplished reaching 1 million. And so our goal is to double that again in 2025 and reach 2 million people. And we think that's eminently doable given all of the things that we've been building upon over the last couple of years, and especially what you guys are doing here with these live streams and everything. This is super exciting. It's stuff that was not even imaginable when we started out, but it is now, part of our mainstay. And that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy to be part of this. I remember when I first became a libertarian and just Googling like Christianity, libertarianism, and so it's funny. Like it can be surreal. I have all these surreal moments now as a podcaster. Like last night, I was talking to Bob Murphy, and I'm like, I got that guy's book on my shelf. I read that stuff when I first became a libertarian, and now I'm talking with him. And same goes for when I joined LCI. I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of crazy that this happened, and I'm happy to be part of it. I think we got a really we
got an
started out
awesome
with a
crew.
core group, and we just built and added to that. We added Alex, we added Cody. I'm really excited. By the way, I'm going to be getting Cody on soon, Cody Cook, and he's going to be kind of now alternating hosting with Doug, right, on the Libertarian Christians podcast. And Cody is like my arch frenemy. Right? Like, he's not my nemesis.
He's so funny,
We're not enemies, but he's like my arch frenemy. We're always like poking at each other and having like friendly disagreements and challenges, and so I'm really excited to have him be part of the crew as well. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about the future. I've never had you on, Norm, to just like, and I kind of did this when I had Doug on before I even joined LCI. I had on my old podcast, the Daniel 3 podcast, I invited Doug on, interviewed him a bit about it. That was like, man, 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a bit.
It's been a bit. But I never had a solo conversation with you, and I know from getting to know you over the last few years, like little snippets, but let's go not all the way back. I don't need to know about where you were born, anything back that. But were you born in a, oh gosh, what's the Kamala Harris quote? Were you born in
middle class family?
Middle class family.
I was raised in a middle class family. Yeah.
So after you were raised in a middle class family, what led you to what's your faith background, and then what led you to libertarianism? Let's start there.
Yeah. So let's go back, and it does actually kind of go back to some childhood stuff too. So my family is somewhat anti-authoritarian to begin with, and rather countercultural in a lot of ways. For one, we are part of the Churches of Christ, which is not really your standard evangelical milieu, and so that's a very definitive part of in my own history. I think it's very important to me. The Churches of Christ come from a kind of background that is a unity movement. And so this is where, when you talk about the arch frenemy, I think that's great, because I think it's wonderful when we are able to bring people from different kind of Christian traditions together in order to understand our faith better. Because it's not just that our own denomination has a handle on and a monopolization on the truth, but rather there are a lot of folks out there we can learn from. And I think that's really important. The Churches of Christ kind of realize that. And even though they've strayed at times from being the kind of unity movement that makes a real difference, I think that the principles and the core are all there, and it's really important. So why also is that important? Because the other thing about the Churches of Christ that this kind of highlights is that in trying to unite Christians around the commonalities that they have as Christians, we begin to realize that the ties that bind us together in the form of governments are less important, and we get back into the real spirit of what Christianity is all about. That in Christ there is no Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male or female, but what Christ is all and it is in all. And so that's like really, really crucial. And it doesn't mean that we're perfect egalitarians either, but rather it's getting back into the plan that God had in store for us, which is anti-Babel. And we can get into that as to how that kind of entered into my thinking later on. So there's a distinct anti-authoritarian streak within the Church of Christ in its history. Lots of folks, there's an interesting history about its interaction in the Civil War, for instance. And in fact, that was kind of, and in fact, the Churches of Christ were very much anti-war almost entirely up until really World War I. When the Churches of Christ that were actually began to get kind of infiltrated a bit more, and began to drift away from that core tenet. It was actually during World War I, in fact, where the Churches of Christ were the most jailed denomination in the United States, which for speaking out against the war, which, by the way, were things like the America First sort of stuff, which the rhetoric going around at those times. After, of course, Woodrow Wilson gets elected by, hey, he kept us out of war. Suddenly, within another year, we're out the front lines trying to deal with that because he wanted a seat at Versailles. And you know how that goes. So that's a whole nother thing. But back to kind of the milieu that I was raised in, at least. Like my family was very much anti-war early on. Like, I was not raised to respect presidents. I was not raised to look at the government in some type of high esteem, but rather to look at all these things with skepticism. We never were in public schools, for instance, as kids. We were early on adopters of homeschooling. We started homeschooling in 1995 when we moved up from Texas to Missouri. And so that was another like major impact that it had upon my own background, is that, the fact that we were never indoctrinated with this idea that the government needs to provide for your education is kind of a big deal. And so that really, I think has a major effect on the way that I've kind of approached just the libertarian movement in general, and why it was so natural for me to make the transition from being what would be still nominally a theologically conservative, politically conservative kid and teenager, and then eventually college student, into realizing that the better way of thinking about our engagement in society as Christians was through a libertarian lens. And so that transition really took place in 2005, after I got married to my wife. So we've nearly been married 20 years now. It's pretty crazy. We had it's interesting that, if I kind of take it kind of back to like what was kind of the root and genesis of the change itself. Well, you could say it started with a girl, but it wasn't Ayn Rand. The kind of classic joke there. That might be a little inside baseball language for libertarians, of course. But it just so happened that when I got involved with Caitlin, her dad, who is a financial planner, not exactly a hardcore libertarian, but definitely kind of a constitutional conservative type, kind of paleo conservative type, ended up introducing me to articles by Mises and Hayek and Rothbard from the Mises Institute, of all things. And so that was my initial introduction into Austrian economics. When I was a college student, I was enamored with the whole thing. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I thought it was amazing. I didn't hear any of this in any of the college classes that I had been in. And so I instantly went to the library at the University of Missouri Rolla campus and picked up issues that they just so happened to have a Cato journal and the Freeman. So simultaneously I got exposed to the Foundation for Economic Education, the Cato Institute, the Mises Institute, the Independent Institute. I mean, all this stuff kind of all at once. And I just went through this huge download phase of just reading everything that I could get my hands on.
Yep.
While in subscribing to the Mises daily articles, if you were around back then, that was a big deal, because that was one of the only places that was sending out daily material on the internet. And to get information, and this is before you had MailChimp and various other kinds of listservs, in that sort of way. This is it. This is what you did. And so it was a crazy time, because that was a point in the libertarian movement where it wasn't that big. And there, even though there were plenty of Christians in it, they weren't very loud. And that it was a big deal back then. If you switch sides to being a libertarian, you got questioned about it. Now it's a little different. And I'd like to think that, what we've done at LCI has been helpful in making people more comfortable in making that kind of transition amongst their friends and family. But back then it was not the same thing. I remember
were there libertarian coming out parties in the early 2000s?
I'm not sure there weren't so much there were parties per se, but it was definitely you definitely got weird questions. I very distinctly remember I was at church and following. Okay, so the more personal history. So when I went to college in Rolla, Missouri. Then went to grad school as a chemical engineering grad student in Austin, Texas, at University of Texas. Went to University Avenue Church of Christ, as it was back then. And I remember very distinctly being at a church service and being in the parking lot of UA one morning. And one of my good buddies, who is I've known him now for 20 years, and his name was James. And James at SB's like, so I hear you're a libertarian. Does that mean you vote for the Green Party candidate? And that's how little people knew about it back then in some level, which is crazy
Right.
to think about now. That's not the way. That's not common anymore.
Well, who
You
could you
know.
point
So,
to like back then? Like before Ron, like at least now I can usually, if someone goes like, and like
mhm.
it's not perfect, but I'll go like, okay, like you know who Ron Paul is, and
Yeah.
they probably only know like five things about Ron Paul, but it gives them something. I'm not sure who you could reference as a popular, sort of like figure of libertarian ideas before 2008.
Well, I mean, strangely or not strangely enough, I mean, Ron Paul was still a fixture amongst libertarians even
It's
back
true.
in that
Yeah.
day. So it was, in fact, one of my earliest introductions to Ron was as an undergraduate, and somebody, I was having some discussions with actually some atheists, which I think was really interesting. This could go into some other deep history and apologetics and things that I used to do back in the day. But I remember this guy, hands me this thing like, "What do you think about this?" And it's this flyer about I think it was it was the Liberty Reform Party or something like that was trying to promote having Ron Paul as their presidential candidate and Walter Williams as the vice presidential candidate. And the big deal on that one was reinvigorating the gold standard. And I thought, at the time I was just discovering all this stuff. I was like, hey, I like this. This is great. But even at that point, I didn't know as much about Ron and whatnot. And I certainly, it took me a bit to, even in the transition period, to really completely disabuse myself of the belief that war was a good idea. Now, despite the fact that, like I said, the Churches of Christ have a great anti-war history, that did diminish over time. We're trying to bring that back even now. But during the 2001 to 2005 period, of course, if you were kind of in the conservative Christian milieu, you were probably going to be pro the offense against Afghanistan and eventually the war in Iraq. And it took, obviously a couple of years before I kind of disabused myself of that notion. It was in 2005, in fact, where like there was a point at which that I realized that I had so many better arguments against the war, against the way in which conservatives were kind of framing the political situations that we were in, whereas all of the libertarian ideas that I had begun to learn about were answering all the questions better. And that was when ultimately I kind of made the switches. Like there was this nervousness about it, because if I do this, that means that people are going that the people that I'm around, my friends, my family, the conservative Christian culture that I'm in, that's going to be different. It's going to change my engagement somewhat with them. Back then, that was a much bigger ask, I think, than what we've tried to do in order to make it easier over time with people, by trying to educate and bring better ideas to the forefront that make it more, to help people crystallize these ideas better and be more comfortable with saying, this is not who I am anymore. I don't want to engage in this culture like this. I don't want to engage with the powers that be like this. There is a better way. And so that was it's a crucial point. And then it, obviously the rest is there's a lot more history to that. I suppose you could say the rest is history, but yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. We could go down so many different avenues. I'm curious. So the you became a libertarian right around. I mean, so I'm trying to think how old I was. I would have been 13 around
Yeah.
2005. So haha, you're old.
Yeah, I know,
Insert joke
right?
here. But actually at the time of the Iraq War, and I just can't imagine. Like, I remember my awakening to the full impact, the full measure of sort of the lies and propaganda of the Iraq War,
Hmm.
probably like 4 or 5 years later after that, which propelled me down my own journey. But I mean, like back then, that is sort of and it's funny. We're getting trolled in the comments by our good friend Matthew Bellis, fellow LCI, and he brought up this point that conservatives are increasingly anti-war, which is it is so weird. I mean, I'm sure it's weird for you because like you're saying that was sort of one of the things that like made it harder for you to kind of like plant your flag and like
Mm-hmm.
I'm a libertarian and to identify politically that way. And for me, it's weird because like part of the reason it's like before I was a libertarian, I was a lefty, and the reason I
Mm-hmm.
went left was because I was like, well, I became anti-war when I started looking into U.S. foreign policy, and it was just like, okay, well, like 2008, 2009, if you're anti-war, unless you've heard of Ron Paul, you kind of figured like, I guess I'm on the left, at least on this issue, because
Yeah.
like it just and it is wild to see how much that has really flipped. Like, what's that been like over the years? Personally, as like, and we'll get into more of LCI here in a minute, but like, as you've continued to do activism as a libertarian Christian through LCI and whatnot, what has it been like to watch that change? And like, have you had like people come to you and like admit like, okay, yeah, you were right, and I've shifted towards you in this
Mm-hmm.
in this regard and things like that. I'm curious if you had any.
That's totally happened.
Yeah.
More than anybody will probably know. There's, I mean, ranging from like the difference is like I would even like I have in my Gmail stores, I have like veritable types of death threats almost, where people would just be like, yeah, just go off and die sort of stuff. And from people who would normally be like kind of purporting that they would be part of that Christian milieu at the time. That has completely changed. The openness towards something different is palpable. There are probably a lot of reasons for that, but I think some of it just has to be that just fatigue of and of observing the insanity of this for just so long, and then realizing that even like just through things like the pullout of Afghanistan and all of the waste that's gone on and the spiraling national debt. I mean, why are like it's just crazy to kind of like how could you not at least have some semblance of at least question it, let alone approve of it anymore. So I think that the ability to flat out question it was not like that was not even conscionable in 2005-ish time. Like you weren't supposed to question the military interventionism as part of that milieu. But that changed over the course of years. A lot of it had to be, just the fatigue. A lot of it was the revelation of different sorts of things. Some of it is just changing sides when like this is like when Democrats go to war, Democrats love it. When Republicans go to war, the Republicans love it. I mean, obviously, even Trump didn't initiate any new wars, but kind of got us close a couple times. And there were certainly things that he did do that conservatives absolutely cheered at, which were, aggressive actions. And that's inadvisable, not appropriate. Like we excoriate that as libertarians just as much as we do any Democrat as well who does it. I mean, that's how we roll. I mean, that's because we oppose it root and branch, and not just when it's our own party. So there's a ways to go before conservatives, I think, start getting really consistent about it. There are some good ones out there who do, are more consistently anti-war. A good man on that front is like Daniel McCarthy, for instance, who's been pretty consistent throughout this the entirety of this. And, he's a good fella. I think he has been, at least, but maybe I don't know some of the deepest history. But yeah, I mean, it is definitely changed. It's been interesting to watch. The things that conservatives care about have changed. Has the Ron Paul movement definitely had an impact there in the long run? That's important, but it's not done. And I think that there's a lot of excitement right now amongst many of our conservative friends for things like Doge. And I think the question that has to be asked, though, is that like, okay, so you're moving away from these prior ideas. You're shifting your way of thinking, but you gotta ask yourself, and this is something we're going to be talking about going into 2025. It's like, what happens when you go beyond Doge? Like, and if you're, if you're thinking, well, we just got to get more efficient. That's not enough. We need to change the way we think about our engagement with the powers that be, the way of our philosophy works around government and the state itself. We have to get beyond Doge, and we have to be thinking more like, instead of the Department of Government Efficiency, maybe we need to be, the Department of Government Elimination. And where did the power stop? And I think that's where conservatives need to start, reevaluating themselves. Like, okay, you're interested in curtailing debt. Good. You want to get out of foreign entanglements. Good. What else are you willing to give up? Are you willing to start thinking differently about the state? Are you willing to start to the point at which, are you going to start actually addressing the real issues regarding things like, I don't know, maybe Social Security, insolvency, and the fact that this is an absolute debacle? Are you going to address the military industrial complex? Yeah. Okay. You want to address that $800 billion, audit that they can't pass at the Pentagon. How about close it down? You ready to do that? Are you going to be willing to? Because you don't seem like it at times.
Well, this is the greatest, I think, weakness of conservatives is that although they don't like, I do believe that most conservatives are against big government in like the abstract.
Yeah.
But they are also very uncomfortable with change. Right. And so it's kind of like, yeah, in the abstract, it's like, yeah, of course we want limited government. And then it's like, well, what if we start slashing all the stuff off this big government? They're like, oh, I don't know. That's a lot of change, right? And so, and like, I think, I was a lefty before I was a libertarian, and that's because, like, fundamentally, even though I do side with a lot of conservatives on certain issues, and certainly on like certain theological issues, I'm more of a social conservative, but temperamentally, I'm kind of more of a lefty in terms of like, I have that progressive mindset of like, no, there is a lot of bad stuff in the world, and yeah, like we shouldn't just gut everything, but like we have to be willing to embrace change, and like, I don't like that the progressives are called progressives, right? Like that's such a hijacking of the word. I mean, it's just like,
oh, it totally is.
You know what I mean? It's like we shouldn't be like, I mean, there should be a balance, right? We should conserve things that are worth conserving and eliminate, abolish, or adapt things that are not working, or that we've seen that experiment play out enough. We don't need to keep it going.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's the conservatives often have the problem. You could use an old Texas phrase that they're all hat and no cattle. A lot of talk, not a lot of action at times. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this like back during the live stream coverage. It's like they talked a much better game this election cycle than they pretty much ever have in my lifetime, including a sort of like not strong enough, but sort of at least like, tacit admission, like, yeah, I guess Ron Paul was kind of right about a bunch of stuff, right? So it's like, okay, fine, like, but can you walk the walk? Like, and we'll see, right? I mean, to borrow something you said, like once Trump's in there and they got the majority and they got Elon and Vivek and all that, it's like, all right, you guys are the man. Like,
yeah,
are you gonna so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because they certainly talked a lot of big talk. I do want to get back to some of the stuff can probably relate to when we're talking about LCI's role for the future, but I do want to also touch on how you then, like, what is the genesis of the Libertarian Christian Institute? What was its founding? What was your original vision for it? And then, like, how has that adapted as time has gone on?
Oh man, there's so many things that have how this has grown and changed. So a lot of this goes back to really 2008. In the wake of Obama's election in November 2008. I had previously I worked a lot with the Ron Paul campaign in 2008. did, door knocking and all the nice stuff and jazz that was fun back then. And there were a lot of interesting things going on in the wake of all of that. There was the founding of Young Americans for Liberty, which was the outgrowth of Students for Ron Paul. Students for Ron Paul were the things that was what we were doing. We were, I was second in command of Ron Paul on the main mall at the University of Texas, which was like this crazy, like I've never seen a crowd like that, just, outside of like a football game or something like that. Just about 5 or 6,000 people on the main mall of the University of Texas, in front of the tower there. And there was also the founding of Students for Liberty, which eventually I got involved in as well. And it was a big part of the latter part of my graduate school experience and whatnot. And in the end, and right after Obama was elected, I started this little website. It initially, a lot of people don't know, it started off actually on a Blogspot. And I started it off, I think it was called the christianlibertarian.blogspot.com. It may even still exist. That thing may still even be out there. You can check it out. All the old stuff. And then, eventually I was like, I'd never built my own website before. So I started, investigating how to do that. And then I was like, okay, let's turn this into its own website and what's available. So I was like, can I find christianlibertarian.com? I was like, nope, somebody already owns that one. and ended up landing on libertarianchristians.com because that was what was available and I could purchase that, domain name. And that's just kind of how it started there. And why I did that and why, I started doing all this stuff to begin with was that I had already been publishing on all these topics. I've been writing articles and publishing in various places back when, even on LouRockwell.com, that was back in the day, various other places. And it was important enough to me, like what I had been writing about and trying to formulate all these, these ideas and trying to synthesize something together, taking analysis of scripture and bringing it in with libertarian philosophy here and there, and trying to show what the concordance of these ideas would look like, that it just made sense to start my own website around it. So I did. And it got some great attention really quickly. One of my friends at the time who helped me out a lot was none other than Tom Woods and Bob Murphy. In fact, they were, I've got actually some pretty old pictures of Bob and me from like 2006. And I got one of Tom and me as well. They were both two of my kind of people that I really latched onto early on in my kind of evolution towards libertarianism, in part because they were both Christians. And I just loved what they had to say and the things that they could point to, and just their eruditeness and all of that. And so I tried to model in some sense off of many of the things that they had done. And so that was, that was part of why I did what I did. And I think it's been great. I love talking to Bob still. I was honored to be on the first guest on the Bob Murphy podcast, incidentally, back many years ago now. And I've been on Tom's podcast a few times, love him to death. And, he's just so great. But so libertarianchristians.com got kind of some great attention very quickly, due to many of the people that I had gotten to know over those prior 3 to 4 years as a young libertarian. And that helped kind of catch fire a bit, and it just kept growing and rolling around and just making headway. Eventually Doug Stewart contacted me out of kind of nowhere, and we started getting to know each other over email, and eventually had him kind of come on as a doing website work and then writing a bunch, and we just kept on going together. And then eventually we just got to the point where, we need to take this to a new level. And so that was when, in roughly around 2014, is when we hosted our first conference. So we started putting out feelers all around the US and just being like, hey, if we hosted a conference in Austin, Texas, would you come? And we got a good response, and we thought this was enough that we put it together. We ran that in August of 2014 for the first time. It was spectacular. We had a tremendous time doing that. We had a ton of great speakers. We had a multi-day event going on. It was hosted at St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. It was great. We had, and at that point in time, we just called that the Christians for Liberty Conference. It was, hosted by libertarianchristians.com. At that point, the Libertarian Christian Institute did not exist. You have to understand, like, it did not exist. So we were, at the time, we borrowed the kind of 501c3 status of Students for Liberty as kind of the helper to make this happen. And they were our fiscal sponsor early on. And a lot of the reason for that is that I was very good friends, and still am, with Alexander McCoben, one of the founders of Students for Liberty. That's a whole nother ball of wax. I love Alexander. He's now doing tremendous work with the Principled Business Group, which is a wonderful new nonprofit that is reaching out to entrepreneurs and businessmen worldwide, and to promote capitalism and ideas of liberty in business. Terrific organization, and they're doing really good things. So we started off, though, not as LCI, but as libertarianchristians.com. We hosted these conferences. At the second conference that we ran in 2015 is when we announced that we were going to be incorporating as a nonprofit. And so in 2015 is when we got our nonprofit status. I believe that's when it was. And it was kind of cool because at that point in time, it was a little strange because you might even remember that during that kind of latter part of the Obama administration, a lot of kind of conservative and libertarian groups were having a lot of hard times trying to get 501c3 status, because they were just getting blocked and getting delayed by the IRS and getting 501c3 status. For one reason or another, that didn't happen to us. We jokingly call this now the IRS proof for the existence of God. That it was the only way that we could have gotten our 501c3 status in under a month, which was what happened. Must have been because of a miracle. So it's a joke, but it's a good memory that we have of just how far we've come.
I wonder if, like, the person who, like, signed off on that, like in an ultimate sort of, like, pride comes before the fall thing, was just like, oh, come on, libertarian and Christian, like, what, there's like 10 people, like, whatever, like, we'll just throw them a bone,
rubber stamp, right? That one.
Yeah.
that could be, I mean, I don't know, but
we've been growing, and like at one point, like, we're gonna get on like some big huge like podcast, like one of us will get on Joe Rogan or something, and then that guy will watch me like, oh no, I can't believe I set that in motion. Oh no,
I stamped that. Oh no, what have I done? Well, just wait, I'll get investigated here soon enough, I'm sure.
I'm surprised. I don't know, it's interesting. I know lots of people who have, like, they've had social media censorship, they got stuff taken down on YouTube and whatnot. I've been pretty lucky to avoid most of that, other than one time having a video censored because of election misinformation, which the misinformation was me saying that some Republicans think the election was stolen. And it's like, that's misinformation. I'm like, what's like, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Like the circular logic just causes my brain to fry. I'm just like, you're admitting that there's election misinformation. So when I'm saying there's election, it's like, what do you mean? It's just like, anyway, that's me getting triggered by something that happened 3 years ago. I'm still angry about that. Just because,
if you mentioned, the unmentionable vaccine of unknown origin, that's a good way to get censored too.
Or like, this crazy idea that the virus came from a lab and was funded by people in our government, like Anthony Fauci. Yeah, that's a conspiracy theory.
Even just mentioning the question is like enough to get you censored. Sometimes it's pretty stupid. Boy, but yeah, we go ahead. Sorry.
So you founded the institute, and what then led to, so like, some people have been here the whole time, but then
Mm-hmm.
some people probably don't realize like the recent stuff that happened with the the
Yeah.
Christians for Liberty network and like the growth that's happened over the last 2 years. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
talk about that and like what was the genesis of that? What is I feel like we're almost like in year 3 of a sort of like
Yeah, like a
planned
takeover of
expansion. Yeah,
yeah.
take over. Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's that been like, and has it gone as expected? Have there been unexpected hurdles,
Mm-hmm.
unexpected successes, anything like that that you think's interesting to bring
Yeah.
up to people?
Yeah, certainly things did not quite go as we expected. And we have shifted in a lot of our strategies over the years because of just, well, kind of necessity and the way that it felt like that our supporters were moving and what they desired and how we could best support them. So initially, we started off, like I said, with running these conferences, and that's all well and good, but when we weren't really seeing the major expansion in that the way that we kind of wanted to, in order to justify keeping that going, we felt that we needed to adjust that strategy a little bit. And maybe someday we'll get back to that. But I think it was sound at the time to say we need to shift away. One of the things that we shifted to, and we were trying to work on, was forming like local groups. In fact, one of the initial strategies we tried to incorporate from the beginning was to model what we were doing after kind of what Students for Liberty did, which was, SFL. A lot of what they were trying to do was develop student groups at universities in order to, promote liberty in academia like that. Great strategy, and it works real well for them. That's all well and good. We thought initially, like, maybe what we can do is kind of adopt that type of model, but let churches be the way that rolls. And maybe not just a single church, but more like an area of churches. Like do we have a group can we have a group in Austin? Do we have a group in St. Louis? What about Houston? What about, Philadelphia, whatever. So we tried that initially, and we tried to recruit leaders and do some of that. And it just didn't quite work out the way that we really wanted it to. Um, we could go into the details as to perhaps why that is the case. But I think just overall, that was not the soundest of strategies to try and operate under. So from there, we really, molded ourselves, or we kept on kind of trying to shift into, we have to keep doubling down on what we do really well, which is creating educational resources. So we shifted away from more like of an SFL model and then more like something like a Ligonier Ministries or something to that effect, where we really are an educational organization at heart, where we are creating the resources that people will want to consume in order to learn about the convergence or concordance of libertarian ideas and Christian theology. And so we can teach economics, ethics, philosophy, theology, culture, history, and all these things kind of working in tandem, and why it's important to then develop a philosophy that has all of these things in mind. Because if we believe that all truth is God's truth, and we don't have to be afraid of any of it, we just need to go out and keep learning. And so we want to be the vanguard of folks who are trying to build that edifice of thought, and demonstrate why this is true, right, good, and why we should continue to build a free society based on these ideas. And so that became kind of the bulwark of what we continued to move on. And that then led into, okay, well, what if, besides writing, besides publishing papers and articles and whatnot, what do we need to do next? That came in, after that, is that we started the Libertarian Christian podcast. Like, that was a big deal for us, is that I had experimented in podcasting early on, ironically enough, and even trying to help out folks like Lawrence Vance, in like, I don't regretfully never really finished the job. But I did a bunch of like kind of just read throughs of his articles early on, in kind of and like back when it was just the libertarianchristians.com podcast, and basically trying to construct almost an audiobook for him, because Lawrence Vance has always been a good supporter of ours, and we love him. He's a terrific dude, just so passionately anti-war, and a gentleman at that. He's a terrific man, and we very much respect him, so that I just love what he does with his work. But we were early adopters into kind of the podcast milieu, and just doing that from day one. But then, forming that into the Libertarian Christian podcast more formally was the next step. And then that just kind of, kept on building on that. So what we wanted to do, eventually is we realized that this type of expansion is where we need to go. We need to keep building on more podcasts. We need to do more of this and double down on the things that we know that are working. And so that's when we formulated this idea for the Christians for Liberty Network, which is, took a slightly different branded approach that perhaps might be a little more, marketable in certain respects, which we can kind of keep both angles, both the Libertarian Christian Institute and that brand, as well as the Christians for Liberty brand. And it kind of builds on all the stuff that we've been doing together. And so the network itself was then, launched in, I guess it was after our Freedom Fest in 2022 is when we really, started going hard on that. And we just kept building from there. And so now it's, okay, well, we've started off with just, 1, 2, 3 podcasts. Now we've got like 7 active podcasts, 1 legacy we maintain of the Godarchy podcast from Mike Meharry. And it's only going to get bigger, guys. There's so much more to do. We've been obviously expanding into more and more video. We've been a big mandate over the last year has been this whole idea of we need to do all of our stuff in video. We need to do more and more live streams. We're going to get more and more people involved in the community in this. And that's what we've been doing. And I think that there's we're building something here that is going to just really pay dividends for a lot of folks in the future. So, and it's all because of, you guys who are here right now and you're supporting this effort. That's if you guys weren't here, we wouldn't be able to do this. So, so I appreciate, what everybody who's supported this over the years and what you've meant to me and to the organization overall.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. It's been, and just sharing my experience from it, I had been doing a solo podcast for a year and a half or so,
Mm-hmm.
and was kind of thinking I needed to take a step back from it because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it, and I didn't want to keep doing it on my own.
Yep.
And I just happened to I had invited Doug on to have a conversation with him, and then we were it's what podcasters do. They're I want to have you on. Okay, but I also want to have you on because I want to fill a slot. So we'll just do it at the same time, right? So I had him on for my show, and then he interviewed me for his show. And then after we were done, I was hey, if at some point you guys want to do any more collaboration or something, I'd be happy to do that or something. And I had no idea that any of this was in store or in the background. I just happened to float that question out there or idea out there at that time. And then Doug and I started talking more, and the rest is history. Now you have this really edgy, crazy haired anarchist guy with all these all these podcasts and videos on your on your channels. So
it's pretty great though. And that's what's so exciting about it all is there's now it's not just, and I want to seize upon something actually before I even launch into that. I really appreciate what you said. You noted that in your experience, you kind of felt a little bit like you were on your own. And that is distinctly why LCI can be so important for people, is that suddenly you will realize that you are not on your own, that not only are you involved in the continuation of Christian history, which is predominantly anti-power or anti-authoritarian, if you will, anti the powers that be, and pro-individualism, individual liberty, and so on. But so you're connected then to that history, and you're connected to a host of people all throughout the world who care about these ideas too. That is spectacular. And I'm really hopeful that over the next year or two that we can do an even better job of helping connect people together in that and building that community up even better. Because it is difficult to do, especially in a day and age like we have now, where disconnection is becoming almost the normative way of thinking. And at this point, people are getting almost tired of social media and trying to figure out, how do I get rid of all of this stuff? But really what it is not necessarily the desire to to completely disabuse or disabuse themselves of all people, but rather trying to just get connected to the people that they want to. How do we get connected to the people that are going to encourage us in our walk with Christ and in our intellectual development, in our in all the ways that we want to grow? How do we do that well? And so I'm hopeful that that's what we're going to be providing more and more in the future. It's going to take some time, some effort, some thinking, some doing, some making some mistakes, but hopefully we're going to figure it out as we go. That's what I'm hoping to do. The point is, though, is that you're not on your own. You don't have to be. That if you're that way, it's going to be by your own choice, because we're going to try to drag you in kicking and screaming if we can. Okay, maybe not quite there, but that's what's so exciting about what we're developing, is the notion that like there are so many people out there who care about these ideas, who care about freedom, and it's not in the way that it's not just, it's not just MAGA light or something like that. It's a different way of thinking. And that it's beyond Doge, it's beyond conservatism, and it's even in some sense it's beyond strict libertarianism too. Like that's what's really exciting, is that once you get into you reconnect with your fundamental theology that matters. We're not talking fundamentalism here, but like just the basic theology that matters. And oh man, it's so exciting, and you get to learn, you get to grow. There's so much to do, and there's so many exciting things to just, man, like come and join us. It's going to be so fun.
So I'm going to make a little analogy here, which I know you'll appreciate, and it'll make Cody happy too, because I'm going to bring up Star Wars. Before we hopped on, Cody was like, "You guys just talk Star Wars for 2 hours." I was like, but I'll bring it up now.
A proposal.
Although, okay, so I'm bringing up. So okay, this fits into the whole Star Wars universe, but the quote comes from the sequel trilogy, which I know, get the groaning out of the way. But there's this quote from the sequel trilogy. I think it was The Last Jedi. So that's the worst one, where he says the darkness rises and then the light rises to meet it. And to some extent, I feel like that is kind of what we've started to do, and I think what's going to continue happening over the next couple of years, because we're seeing a political realignment happening right now, and some of that is good, some of it's concerning, right? Yeah. And one of the things we've talked about a lot is sort of this rise of it, and it's both it's a little obscure, but it's also growing in popularity and somewhat in its impact in the conversation. But I guess, I don't know what you call it. It's not really a movement. It's not really an ideology. This thing called Christian nationalism, right? Mm-hmm. And I kind of view that as an outgrowth of sort of Christians being dissatisfied with the sort of like conventional 3x5 index card of allowable opinion when it comes to politics from a Christian point of view. And I've engaged a lot with the Christian nationalist types, and what I can always agree with them on is, yes, there's a lot about the modern liberal post-World War II consensus and order that is largely wrong and dissatisfying. But the answers that they come up with as what we got to move to, that's where they strike out, and where I'm hoping that as much as some people I think are at first sort of like maybe their ears are tickled by sort of like that, maybe like the first volley of Christian nationalist arguments, the mott, so to speak, of the Christian nationalist thing, where it's just like, hey, well, we have a state, we have a government, and it should just, shouldn't it be run by Christians and push Christian ideas? And, it's like, and you know what, listen, to some extent, it's like, I go, okay, sure, yeah, fine. Like, I guess, but what are the Christian ideas that we're talking about here? What does the Bible teach? Like, that's what it comes down to. It's like, when they're back in that mott, the whole Mott and Bailey fallacy, if you don't know what I'm talking about, but sure, yeah, I would like, if government exists, I would like people in government to I'd rather them probably be Christian than not Christian. I'd like the laws to be based on Christian morals rather than secular morals. But like, that's sort of like saying nothing, right? It's like you need to define it. You got to actually set the standards, and I'm hoping that is what we can do, is to sort of like latch on to the growing dissatisfaction, but to then provide people with like, hey, like the answer to the failures of liberalism isn't to go backwards,
Right.
right? And that's the issue, is that, like, yes, there's a lot of problem with modern liberalism, modern democratic Western institutions, but the issues with them are not to the extent that they embodied the values of liberty. It's to the extent they deviated from the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and sort of those core principles that are at the heart of the American Revolution. But there's this weird. I want to get you to comment on this. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. There's this weird overlap between the radical left and radical right now, where they, and this crosses over into some of the, even like where you see somewhat of a rise of anti-war sentiment, where they kind of are, maybe they don't hate America, but they're no longer infatuated with sort of like the idea or the identity of America in the same way that maybe you would expect conservatives to be in like the 90s and 2000s.
Okay.
And on one hand, that tickles my ears because I was a hardcore raging lefty and was like, uh, I've always kind of had a little bit of an allergy to sort of like the myth of American exceptionalism, right?
Yeah.
And and so some people are on the right are like, yeah, that's fine, and that's because, like, really what was great wasn't America, it was Europe, right? It was medieval Europe. That's what we make medieval Europe great again. And so, but anyway, it's that overlap between, like, because like the left, can be like that. You see pictures of people burning American flags and, there's kind of like anti-American spirit, and you see that a little bit on the right too. And I don't know, like I've started to evolve on this, but I struggle with it because on one hand, I don't like mixing Americanism with Christianity. On the other hand, it feels like this sort of overreaction that we see on left and right now is like throwing the baby with the bath out with the bathwater and then some. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on some of the stuff that I'm observing. If you see some of the same things or see some things differently, and again, I think we would agree though that, like, with all these threads, we hope that LCI can be providing some sanity and light to this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's touch points all over the place in my own way of thinking on these topics. I mean, first off, I agree that for instance, that there is the progressive left and the disenfranchised or disaffected right have a lot of overlap. And this is why I think it is appropriate to, denote some of these things as not only we call it the woke left, and there's kind of a woke right. That's a reality now. And I don't have any compulsion of not acknowledging that. Like, it's like there's that's a reality. Where we see, I think, some of the touch points with our own way of thinking is like, because we also as libertarians see that there is something wrong with the world, and we're not just trying to go back to 1947 to hit the post World War II consensus era again or something like that, which we don't see that as being desirable. So we have like some overlap in the Venn diagram there too. But it's not because we need to go back to medieval Europe or even to, precisely what happened, at America's founding per se, because we also want to recognize the inconsistency. I mean, this is why we're seeking after, you could call it the more perfect union, if you will, and realizing that there were still things that are worth improving upon. And that's what real progress is. Right. So we're not trying to harken back to just some idyllic part of our past, but rather develop a set of principles that are more appropriate for and true, and are based on what we believe as Christians, more than anything else. And so, like, in some sense, that these folks are like, oh, well, we just need to go back, to where Christians were in charge or whatnot. It's like, no, hold on a sec. You want to go back in time and recapture part of Christian history? This Cody said this in a recent article. In fact, he's like, you're not going back far enough. It's like you got
Right, yeah.
like that. And incidentally, harkening back to our earlier part of the conversation, this was a big part of the churches of Christ in the unity movement. It's like, how do we recapture the ethos of the first century Christians, of the second century Christians who were radical in their outlook for what the world needed to change into, and that was into the image of Christ. And so, what did that look like? It meant being being countercultural. It meant evangelism. It meant these sorts of things. Not we got to weasel our way and take power in various ways, and then bring forward the ideal society that Christ envisioned. Like that's not the way it was meant to be. And so I think that there's a lot of wrongheadedness amongst the Christian nationalists, in that they're taking a lot of the same strategies of the progressive left and trying to implement them just in their own way of being. And this has led some, I think, to almost erroneously kind of look at what they're doing as it's almost like a kind of a surreptitious conspiracy theory on its own, where it's not actually like. I think that there are some well-intentioned Christian nationalists out there. They are well-intentioned. They're also just very, very wrong in there.
Well, it's sort of like it's like an understandable reaction when, and we can get into labels. Like I know I've expressed privately and publicly, I don't always like the label woke, because it just seems like one of those like ambiguous words that like I don't like. It just depends on how you define it, I guess. But it sometimes feels like it's thrown around a little bit too vapidly. But
by media especially. But I think there's some consensus even now as to what it means when we talk about that. So I think that's okay. But
yeah. But I think that it's like when people are operating in a sort of like post nation state world, right? Like that's the modern conception. It's like they don't know there's other options, right? Like are they or they even if they know about them, like they don't take them seriously. Like maybe they've heard of libertarianism, but like they think that's like, oh, that's just weird Ayn Rand stuff, or right? Or
they don't have power, so they're not going to make anything happen anyway, or something like that.
Right, but it's just, and this is, I think, my fundamental critique of Christian nationalism, which I've done several debates and conversations with them, which is that you want to take the ring of power, but you don't throw it in Mount Doom. You're like, well, no, we can use it for good. But I'm like, sorry, like at the end of the day, the greatest subverter of Christianity, the greatest subverter of the church, the greatest subverter of even Christ himself in some ways, you could argue, has always been the state, has always been government. And that's not something that we can really like, reform or twist. And it's just like, I mean, we want to talk about going back far enough. Like I agree, going back to like first, second, even third and fourth century Christianity, there's a lot to like about it. Like one of my favorite church fathers is Athanasius, because I just love that quote. Like, if the world is against the truth, then I am against the world. And I mean, it's like that's like the like Athanasius, these early Christians, they weren't afraid. They didn't want to grab power and rule, with a sort of like, Christian iron fist, but they weren't afraid to live, as you said, counterculturally. They weren't afraid to be very bold and unapologetic with the gospel. Exactly.
Like you want to see the people who spoke truth to power. It's the folks who were willing to die for their beliefs like that. That is the ultimate way of speaking truth to power. Like it's not taking it over. I mean, by the way, this is why Christian nationalists don't really like Lord of the Rings. You'll note this in their discussion, because they intuitively know that it is against what they're trying to do. It is against their mentality. I mean, like at least they see that, I think, inherently.
Well, it's just funny because like I've heard many of them say like, well, we just have to deal with the world the way it is, and I'm like, okay, I mean, first of all, that's almost a tautology
That's
that ends
it.
nothing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like, I mean, yeah, I also want to deal with the world the
Yeah,
way
I
it
have
is.
to.
So,
So I have a job and use, and
right,
work with a dollar and have a savings
cr-
account.
Christ didn't tell his disciples go and make disciples of all the nations while like, but like, yeah, you do that by like, what did Paul say? I've become all things to all people.
Yeah.
But you deal with the world as the way it is, but you shouldn't just be content to leave it
Mhm.
the way it is. Like
Yeah.
you meet people where they're at to then bring them to the well that is Christ, right? The
Yep.
well that doesn't run dry.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of people talking about like the um the expansion of like the church, right? And you get this on both sides. You get dispensationalists, you get post-millennialists and whatnot. And I'm just like I don't know, like I've been doing a lot of study of what did the first Christians think about the kingdom of God and the growth of the
Mhm.
kingdom of God. Now, granted, they didn't have the same terms that we had, right? They weren't having debates about amillennialism versus premillennialism and all that, right? They didn't have reformed theology versus Anabaptists and stuff back then.
Sure.
But what you can read in their mindset was that they viewed the growth of the church as the primary means of the expansion and growth and presence
Yeah.
of the kingdom of God here on earth. And
That's
it's like
right.
and that does have secondary effects in terms of not only people's eternal status
Mhm.
of being saved, but that I was actually just talking to Bob about this last night. That whole like passage, like where the spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Like
Mhm.
true liberty does come from that, like, the salvation that we have in Christ, because we are set free from our sin to then live as free men for Christ. And that's I think that's kind of like what you were hinting at earlier, like this synergy. Like, I think some people are sometimes, when they're confronted with this idea of like the Libertarian Christian Institute, or what I talk about biblical anarchy, they're like, they look at that and go square peg round hole, right? Like,
Yeah.
why are you trying to and it's like, no, actually, like these terms are going together to uh sort of push you down the road to seeing that actually, like, libertarianism is, granted, it's not the same as Christianity, but it is a political philosophy that I think, the Venn diagram of overlap is pretty much
Very
100% in terms
large.
of,
Yeah.
like, yeah, in terms of what Christianity teaches us in terms of our duties to our fellow man, how we're
Mhm.
to live at peace with our fellow man, how we're to sort of like live out the values of the gospel in this life while we live
Yeah.
as ambassadors for Christ. And it's like these are actually, I think, old historic truths of Christianity that we lost, and maybe the
Mhm.
Reformation started to reclaim some of that, and we've been doing that ever since, just trying to reclaim sort of that initial sort of like, you know prophetic tradition of, like you said, speaking truth to power for the kingdom of God. And anyway, I guess where we can land on then in terms of like, what does this mean? So like we've identified like where we see ourselves fitting in thematically.
Mhm.
uh what some of our, obviously, our enemies, so to speak, not like we hate our enemies, we love our enemies, right? But our enemies, so to speak, are obviously the state, obviously those who are out there saber rattling for endless wars, those who are advocating for endless government expansion and spending. And Christian nationalism is a, misguided response to a lot of these, issues and discontent that Christians have with the current political order. So we've identified the the game, right? Like we laid out the chessboard, we laid out the pieces, we've made moves, right? What's next? Like, over the next year or two, how do we
Mhm.
take all of this and continue to expand, to get out in front of churches, in front of Christians, and in front of even the unsaved? And how can the Libertarian Christian Institute continue to make an impact not only on our nation, but um, being part of the church's overall mission to see the gospel spread here on earth?
So there are some kind of broad stroke ways that I'll kind of address that. And then there's some pretty concrete ones that I think we can address pretty quickly as well. In broad strokes, we want to keep doing what's working. And the way that we measure that, at least, is are we making progress in the dissemination of these ideas in more and more ways to more and more people. And that's why I think we can be fair, like, again, kind of going back to what we said earlier, like, we feel pretty confident in the way in which we're reading our metrics and whatnot, that we're reaching more people than ever before in the history of this organization, of the website as a whole, back from 2008. We're doing more than we ever have. That's super exciting. So we're going to keep doing that, and we're going to keep doubling down on what works, which means we want to keep engaging with folks where they are, like where the audiences are, where they are coming to, places like YouTube, places like, Twitter, X, and hopefully, continuing to engage people where they're showing up and letting that keep disseminating from there. But where can we expand in other ways? Like there's some interesting bits there. One of the things that I am really excited about is that we have, to back this up a little bit, we've known for some time that the Libertarian Christian Institute is read and listened to and watched in over 100 countries worldwide. We know that from the metrics and where IP addresses are coming from, and those statistics and analytics show that's we can see that. What we haven't been able to do up to now is reliably provide people who do not speak English as a native language, or who just desire something in their native language, with the same types of materials that we can provide very readily in English. There are now tools available to us to do rapid, on the fly and on demand translation of our articles. And we have begun to implement that on the website, and enabling people to read what we write in more and more languages. This has been a tremendous challenge. It has been very difficult to try and complete translation projects over time. And it's hard to do. It just is. Now, at least with these AI tools that are out there and the new technologies that are available to us, we can reach kind of kind of take the first hurdle way more quickly. And this enables so much. And the initial response to this in the experiments that we've run are demonstrably crazy. The results are absolutely astronomical, more than I could have possibly imagined. And we've learned things even through these experiments that we did not know that prior. Like, we expected, for instance, that many of our brothers and sisters in Latin America were going to be the highest, would be where the highest demand would be. And because that's who we talk to, we knew that. I mean, we have, I see Olivia in the chat. I'm sure there are others here. We're going to be talking, with more of our Latin American brothers and sisters in the coming week, hopefully, talk a little bit more about this stuff. The Spanish language materials have been in demand. We know that. And we've been trying to figure out how to provide that. But what we didn't know is that not only is Spanish in demand, we also kind of knew that Portuguese was in demand, because we have folks from Brazil who contact us on a regular basis. We try to help them out as best we can. Always give them what we can in terms of materials and permissions, whatever they need. We try. But what we didn't know is that there are folks who want our stuff in French. There's folks who want our stuff in German. And there's folks, I mean, we're getting translated materials sent over to Iran. It's crazy. I am so blown away by our initial results here in looking at the fact that, like, Iran was one of the top 5 countries that were requesting translations of our materials. What? What? That's amazing. And we didn't know that. And so what we're realizing is that there is a even broader swath of people throughout the world who are dying for new ideas. And we want to try and be a provider of that. And we're going to keep on trying. We're going to keep experimenting. We're probably going to fail a few times, but we're going to do the best we can to keep on pressing on to give people what they need in order to learn about God, about the Bible, about what they need in order to make progress, real progress in their own communities, in their own countries, and in order to press forward for individual liberty throughout the world. If we can be a part of that, we're going to try. The demand is there. We're going to try to meet it. I don't know if we're going to be super successful, but we're that is one of our biggest initiatives going forward, is trying to fix that issue. So we're going to be producing more and more content than we ever had before. We have been slowly but surely, we've built up all these podcasts. We're going to probably start another one next year. Who knows what it's going to be? We're still kind of in initial talks about that. We're going to be producing 3 different books in 2025, which is really exciting, including an updated version of Faith Seeking Freedom. It's going to be awesome. We have a book about COVID-19 and the church that is coming in. And we got a book. Cody Cook has actually written a book about libertarianism and Anabaptism, which is really, really cool. I'm really excited. That's going to be one of the early things that we're going to release. We're going to be talking a lot about this idea of going beyond Doge. Because again, as our Christian brethren are looking at what's going on around us and perhaps looking at things like Doge and getting excited about that, we got to start asking better questions to say what happens after that. Where do we go from here? And then we're going to, also again try to just keep pressing on internationally the best we can. We've been excited to see the progress all over the world. Let's see what we can do to help. And so that's what we're doing, man. It's like we're gonna keep building community. We're gonna keep on producing content. We're gonna keep helping people the best we can. We need everybody's help to do it, though. So help us keep the lights on, and we really appreciate everybody's support in the effort.
Yeah, and I'm really optimistic because, and I want to make sure I say this in like the right way, because obviously if things get better, right? Like if wars end, if government stuff gets slashed, then well, that's going to be good. And it's like, hey, implementing libertarian ideas results in good things happening, and we can come along behind that. And if it doesn't happen, and things don't get cut, and government efficiency ends up being a euphemism for just bigger government with a different paint of code on it, as the saying goes, well, then we go, all right, well, these people aren't serious about cutting government. Who are the people who are serious about cutting government? Who are the people who are serious about peace in the world? Who are the people who are serious about, understanding what it takes to create a society where humans can flourish alongside one another? Which I think is again, I just talked to Bob last night, and we talked about so much of this, and so it touches what we're talking about now. It's just like, because the idea, this was I know an LCI slogan a few years ago, the idea of to live free and flourish, and I don't mean, I know people might hear that the wrong way. It's not like a prosperity gospel thing, right? It's more of a God's natural order for mankind is that we live at peace with one another, and that when we live at peace, when we respect property rights, when we have voluntarism and free trade, that this creates a sort of human flourishing. God's creation is operating the way it's designed, and that brings glory to him. And that, again, I think that shows gospel values being lived out here on earth. And so we should be excited about, and I know we are, but I'm just saying more people need to I think make that connection and continue to be excited by that connection, that we can even when things might get worse. I think that if there's anything that's true about what's going on the last couple of years and the political realignment, is that people are more open to hearing something different than ever. Now, the danger is there's a lot of things out there that are different. So that just means that we have to get to work. Yeah. We got to get to work. We got to get out in front of as many people as we can in the places where people are listening and tuning into, both online, virtually, and in person, and make the arguments and win. And we have the truth on our side, right? Yeah. If we have the truth on our side, then if God is for us, who could be against us? And I'm sure there's a lot of, like you said, the God's plan, God's ways are not our ways. So like, we set our plans, things will work out the way that God has ordained them to be. But I believe that LCI has an important role to play in things to come. And if you believe that, and if you've enjoyed this conversation, please, before you go, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already. And as the bottom ticker says, go to libertarianchristians.com/donate and help us take this next step into 2025 and beyond to bring this message of hope, of liberty, of a world set free both through Christ and set free to live for the kingdom of God and not for the kingdoms of this world. And we'll see what happens, see where that journey takes us. Any closing thoughts, Norm?
Love it, man. I'm just excited for what is going to happen in 2025. Like, we are going to take new steps out in faith, and hopefully, and we'll see. Man sets forth the plan, but then it's God who directs his steps. I think is where we were trying to go there, right?
Exactly.
So yep. we can appreciate that, and we're going to step out in faith, and we hope that you guys will, we hope that you guys will join us in the journey, because it's going to get exciting here really soon.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks, Norm, for coming on tonight. This was last minute, but hey, spontaneous order worked again, right?
We didn't
have to centrally plan this podcast.
We certainly did not.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. I will be back. I'm actually going to be hopping on another show here in a little bit. So if you're, I don't have a link to it. Go to Twitter. I've retweeted it there, so go to @BiblicalAnarchy. Other than that, I have one more live stream coming up on my end next week on that'll be Monday again, going into section 3 of this giant book that I sprain my wrist on every time I lift it up because of how giant it is, by our good friend Scott Horton. So doing one more stream then, and then next Thursday we're doing a special end of the year stream, I think on the 26th, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
You just go to libertarianchristians.com, and I think you'll see it on the front page. There is a link to, I think there's going to be a special sign up, because there's going to be a special link to get into the Zoom call or whatever we're doing there. But yeah, that's going to be exciting too. It's just a little get together with everybody, and just enjoying some good drinks, some good chatter, and some good time.
All right. Sounds like a good time indeed. All right. Well, thanks, Norm. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and we'll talk to you again next time. Take care.